Picture a legendary filmmaker, a visionary, whose work provided the direct blueprint for Star Wars.
Oh, and laid the foundation for classic westerns, too, like A Fistful of Dollars.
Right, exactly. We were
Mhm.
talking about a director sitting at the absolute peak of global recognition.
Yeah, it's the ultimate picture of cinematic success, the kind of legacy most artists spend their entire lives chasing.
Exactly. Now, take that exact same director at the height of his influence and imagine him being fired by a Hollywood studio for alleged mental illness.
Wow.
And imagine him returning home completely unable to secure funding in his own country. Then imagine him in a state of despair so profound that he takes a blade to his own wrists and throat multiple times.
It's just a stunning contradiction. I mean, how does the architect of the modern action epic find himself discarded by the very industry he helped build?
Well, welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to explore the turbulent, triumphant, and often tragic life of Akira Kurosawa.
The man they called the Emperor of Japanese cinema.
That's the one. We're going to trace his journey from a traumatized youth in a ruined Tokyo to an international icon who completely redefined the visual grammar of the modern blockbuster.
Yeah, we're looking at the massive achievements, the bitter failures, and just the fierce resilience of his life story.
Yeah.
Because to really understand Kurosawa, and particularly the fearless, unblinking nature of his cinema, you can't start on a movie set.
No, you really can't.
You have to start with the literal horrors that forced him to keep his eyes wide open as a child.
Right. So, born in 1910, Kurosawa grew up in a moderately wealthy family. His father, Isamu, was of samurai descent and directed an army physical education institute. But surprisingly, Isamu was very open to Western traditions.
Yeah, he believed theater and cinema had immense educational value.
Exactly. He actively encouraged his kids to watch films. I think Kurosawa actually saw his first movie at age 6.
But the truly formative influence on his life was his older brother, Heigo. Heigo was brilliant, deeply interested in foreign literature, and he actually became a famous benshi.
A bit.
Yeah, so in the era of silent films in Tokyo, a benshi was a live narrator who stood next to the screen, performing the voices and explaining the plot to the audience.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and Kurosawa just idolized him. They lived together and were basically inseparable.
But their bond was forged in something incredibly dark. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake completely devastated Tokyo, leaving thousands upon thousands dead. Kurosawa was only 13 years old at the time.
Just a kid.
Right. And Heigo took him out to walk through the devastation. There were human and animal corpses scattered everywhere across the ruined landscape. And naturally, the 13-year-old Kurosawa tried to look away.
But Heigo strictly forbade it.
He did.
He literally physically forced his younger brother to look directly at the carnage. He told him that if you look away, you let the fear control you. If you face the horror head-on, the fear loses its power.
Okay, let's unpack this because if you expose a middle schooler to a literal landscape of corpses, the standard psychological outcome isn't artistic genius.
Right, it's severe trauma.
It's debilitating trauma. And the tragedy only compounds. A decade later, the rise of talking pictures killed the silent film industry. Heigo lost his career as a benshi and tragically took his own life. And just 4 months after that, Kurosawa's eldest brother also died. Kurosawa suddenly found himself as the only surviving son. So I'm struggling to see how that grim exposure to death, followed by his beloved brother's suicide, doesn't just completely break a person. How does that translate into art?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this trauma became Kurosawa's core artistic philosophy. The events didn't break him. They forged his willingness to explore the darkest extremes of human passion and violence on screen.
Wow.
That lesson from the earthquake, confronting unpleasant truths head on, that became the defining characteristic of his movies. He just refused to look away from the darkness of the world, whether that was poverty, corruption, or the brutality of war.
So, left adrift as the sole surviving son, he stumbled into the exact same industry that had just abandoned his brother.
Yeah.
And the way he got his foot in the door is practically a comedy sketch.
It really is.
In 1936, a new film studio called PCL, which later became the massive studio Toho, they put out an ad for assistant directors. And the application required an essay discussing the fundamental deficiencies of Japanese films and how to overcome them.
And Kurosawa, who had no prior interest in film as a profession, wrote this deeply sarcastic essay.
He really went for it.
He basically argued that If the deficiencies are fundamental, there is simply no way to correct them. It was a half-mocking critique of the very people he was asking for a job.
It's the equivalent of getting hired by roasting the interviewer. I mean, he showed this innate rebellion against authority right from day one, and incredibly, it worked.
Yeah, it caught the eye of director Kojiro Yamamoto, who insisted the studio hire him. And Yamamoto became his mentor, teaching him the mechanics of stage construction, script writing, editing, all of it.
And Kurosawa proved to be a quick study. By 1943, right in the middle of World War II, he made his directorial debut with a judo action film called Sanshiro Sugata. But almost immediately, that rebellious nature clashed with the authorities.
Oh, big time. The Japanese wartime censorship office absolutely despised it. They deemed the film objectionably British-American in its style.
Because of the pacing?
Yeah, the pacing was too fast, the framing was too individualistic. It only saw the light of day because the legendary director Yasutaro Ozu personally defended its artistic merit.
And Kurosawa's intense, demanding directorial style was already fully formed by this point, right?
Definitely. I mean, for his 1944 propaganda film, The Most Beautiful, which focused on female factory workers, he refused to let the actors just read lines. To capture a realistic sense of exhaustion and camaraderie, he forced his actresses to live in a real factory during the shoot.
Wait, a real factory?
Yes, and eat the substandard factory food and refer to each other only by their character names off camera.
That is intense. And the lead actress, Yoko Yaguchi, was actually chosen by the cast to present their formal demands and complaints to him because his methods were so grueling. They argued constantly on set.
But those arguments sparked a romance.
Yeah, they ended up getting married in 1945, and they stayed together for 40 years.
It's a great story. But, the battle with censors didn't end with the Japanese surrender either. In 1945, he made The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail. And Japanese wartime censors had initially attacked it for being too Western and democratic.
Right.
But then the American occupation began, and the new American censors banned the exact same film for being too feudal.
I have to admit, that sounds like a bizarre contradiction. Why would the Americans care if a movie was feudal?
So the American occupational forces were terrified of anything that glorified the samurai code. They believed that feudal ideals like blind obedience, dying for one's lord, militaristic loyalty, they thought those were the exact psychological ingredients that led to Japan's aggression in World War II, including the kamikaze pilots.
Oh, I see.
So they strictly banned period pieces. Kurosawa found himself caught in this comical crossfire too American for the Japanese and too Japanese for the Americans.
So freed from wartime censorship shortly after, Kurosawa wanted to express a new post-war individualism. But to do that, he needed a muse who embodied pure, unbridled rebellion.
Enter Toshiro Mifune.
Yes.
Kurosawa had helped persuade Toho Studios to sign this intense young actor after an audition where Mifune had alienated most of the judges with his explosive, almost feral energy. Kurosawa cast him as a volatile, tuberculosis-ridden gangster in the 1948 film Drunken Angel.
And Mifune's performance was just electric. It kicked off a legendary 16-film collaboration between the two men. Kurosawa deliberately refused to smother Mifune's vitality.
It was a defiant stance. It startled audiences, bringing this raw, physical intensity to the screen that actually predated Marlon Brando's similar impact in America by several years.
And they followed it up in 1949 with Stray Dog, which is a detective movie exploring the painful, desperate mood of post-war recovery.
Yeah, Kurosawa included a virtually wordless 8-minute sequence showing the detective, played by Mifune, wandering the sweltering streets in disguise.
And he used actual documentary footage of war-ravaged Tokyo neighborhoods interspersed with the narrative, right?
Exactly. And by doing that, he essentially established the blueprint for the modern police procedural and the buddy cop genre.
Then, a massive turning point arrived in 1950. Kurosawa directed a low-budget movie called Rashomon, shot quickly in a forest. The premise is simple. A samurai is murdered, and his wife is assaulted. I've heard the term Rashomon effect thrown around in pop culture, usually just meaning people remember things differently. Is that really all it is, or is there a deeper mechanic at play?
It is much deeper than just faulty memory. Rashomon features 4 conflicting testimonies, including a medium channeling the dead samurai.
Right.
The psychological insight Kurosawa presents is that people don't just misremember, they actively lie to preserve their own ego and self-image. Even the dead man lies to make himself look more honorable. It suggests that absolute truth is impossible because human vanity always gets in the way.
So the film had a lukewarm reception in Japan. But a representative for an Italian film company named Giuliana Stramigioli recognized its brilliance and secretly entered Rashomon into the 1951 Venice Film Festival.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rashomon winning the Venice Film Festival's highest prize, the Golden Lion, it completely upended the global film landscape.
How so?
At the time, the international festival circuit was dominated by Italian neorealism, films shot with non-professional actors, focusing on gritty, working-class struggles in a very documentary-like style. But Kurosawa presented something entirely different. Highly stylized, dynamic, kinetic, visual storytelling that still possessed deep philosophical weight.
It didn't just make Kurosawa a global star. It single-handedly opened the Western market to Japanese cinema. It dethroned neorealism as the prevailing international trend and paved the way for audiences to discover other Japanese masters like Mizoguchi and Ozu.
Exactly. And armed with this international fame and unprecedented studio backing, Kurosawa entered the 1950s ready to push the absolute limits of cinematic scale, budget, and genre.
In 1952, he released Akira, an unsentimental look at a Tokyo bureaucrat dying of cancer who tries to find meaning in his final days by building a children's playground. Then, in 1954, he embarked on Seven Samurai.
Seven Samurai is a marvel of production and narrative engineering. It took 148 days of shooting, spread over almost a year, and went 3 times over budget. Yeah, making it the most expensive Japanese film ever made at the time. Running for almost 3.5 hours, it essentially created the template for the modern action ensemble movie.
Let's actually dig into how he created that template, because this is foundational.
Yeah.
Before Seven Samurai, you didn't really have the putting a crew together trope. Kurosawa mapped out the exact mechanics we see in everything from The Avengers to Ocean's 11.
Yep, the stoic leader assembling experts.
Right. Each with a distinct archetype, the master swordsman, the comic relief, the young hothead. He also revolutionized how geography works in action scenes. He mapped out the village so clearly that you, the audience, always understood where the bandits were attacking from and where the heroes were stationed.
He followed that up in 1958 with The Hidden Fortress, which is an action-adventure comedy about a princess and a general trying to cross enemy lines. Crucially, Kurosawa chose to tell this grand, epic story from the perspective of the 2 lowest, most bumbling peasants in the hierarchy.
And a young George Lucas would watch this and map that exact narrative device onto 2 droids named R2-D2 and C-3PO for Star Wars.
Exactly.
Then in 1961, Kurosawa released Yojimbo, a dark comedy about a masterless samurai who strolls into a town run by 2 violent factions and manipulates them into destroying each other. It featured an unprecedented level of graphic violence and played so well with Western genre conventions that Sergio Leone essentially did an unauthorized, scene-by-scene remake called A Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah, and Toho actually filed a successful lawsuit on Kurosawa's behalf for that.
Throughout this period, Kurosawa was developing a highly distinct visual grammar that would influence generations of filmmakers. He popularized the wipe transition, where a line moves across the screen to reveal the next scene to keep the pacing brisk.
And he utilized extreme weather like heavy rain and driving wind, not just for aesthetic purposes, but to physically manifest the chaotic internal states of his characters.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How does a director who is adapting high art-like Shakespeare's Macbeth in his film Throne of Blood simultaneously create the most commercially viable, crowd-pleasing action tropes of the 20th century?
Well, it comes down to his technical innovations, specifically how he manipulated the camera to capture motion. Kurosawa pioneered the use of multiple cameras shooting the same scene simultaneously.
Oh, really?
Yeah. By capturing a wide shot, a medium shot, and a close-up all at once, he could cut during the action like right in the middle of a sword swing. This maintained fluid kinetic energy without forcing actors to repeat the exact same motion for different setups, which, often looks staged.
He also utilized what's called the axial cut. Instead of changing the camera angle, he would jump the camera closer and closer to a subject on the exact same line of sight.
Yeah, it creates a jarring rhythmic punch. It makes the viewer feel like they are physically stepping closer to the tension. He didn't see a divide between high art and entertainment. He married the psychological depth of literature with kinetic, perfectly choreographed visual motion.
But Kurosawa's perfectionism, massive budgets, and sprawling shoots were eventually on a collision course with a changing industry. By the late 1950s and into the 60s, television began dominating leisure time.
Cinema audiences shrank, and studios lost their appetite for the financial risks that Kurosawa required.
But the breaking point arrived with Redbeard in 1965. It was a deeply humanist period film, but it took well over a year to shoot. leaving Kurosawa and his crew completely exhausted. It also marked the unexplained, abrupt end of his collaboration with Toshiro Mifune.
Yeah, after 16 films, they never worked together again.
With his exclusive contract at Toho over, Kurosawa looked to Hollywood. His first project, an English-language thriller called Runaway Train, fell apart due to language barriers. He then pivoted to an incredibly ambitious 20th Century Fox project, Tora.
Tora. Oh, this one.
The concept was to show the attack on Pearl Harbor from both the American and Japanese perspectives, with Kurosawa directing the Japanese sequences. But it quickly turned into a nightmare.
His 4-hour script was chopped down to a 90-minute segment. He struggled to communicate with an unfamiliar crew. But the real issue was a massive clash of working methods.
How so?
American studios operated like factories, relying on strict schedules and assembly line efficiency. Kurosawa operated like an artisan, willing to wait days for the right cloud cover.
The American producers simply did not understand his meticulous methods. Rather than accepting that they had hired a demanding auteur, they concluded he must be mentally ill.
Wait, really? Like clinically?
Yeah. They forced Kurosawa to be examined by a neuropsychologist. The doctor forwarded a diagnosis to the Fox executives, stating Kurosawa was suffering from neurasthenia and manic excitement.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It was a highly convenient way to sideline an expensive perfectionist, though. On Christmas Eve, 1968, the studio announced Kurosawa was leaving due to fatigue. They had effectively fired him.
He tried to bounce back in Japan. In 1970, he gathered a group of famous director friends and shot Dodeskaden incredibly fast to prove he could work efficiently. But audiences were indifferent. The film lost money. The Japanese film industry suspected he would never make another movie.
Which leads to December 22nd, 1971. Believing his career was over and struggling with his health, the 61-year-old Kurosawa took a blade and slit his wrists and throat multiple times.
He survived, thankfully, but he retreated into domestic life, totally uncertain if he would ever direct again.
This raises an important question, though. How does the film industry treat its aging visionaries? Kurosawa's process hadn't changed. The industry's economic realities had. The exact methods that brought Japanese cinema to the global stage were suddenly pathologized by executives who just wanted a cheap, fast product. It's a brutal reality of the collision between art and commerce.
Just when his own country's studio system had completely written him off, a lifeline came from an unexpected place, the Soviet Union.
Yeah, in 1973, the Soviet studio Mosfilm asked if he wanted to work with them. He proposed adapting a book he'd wanted to make since the 1930s, Dersu Uzala, about a hunter living in Siberia.
It was a grueling shoot in brutal natural conditions, but the film won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film.
Even with an Oscar in hand, Japanese studios still wouldn't fund his next epic. But Kurosawa was about to be resurrected by the very filmmakers who had grown up studying his visual grammar in the West. George Lucas, hot off the massive success of Star Wars, was shocked to learn his idol couldn't get funding.
So Lucas, along with fellow fan Francis Ford Coppola, used their enormous industry clout. They essentially coerced 20th Century Fox, the exact same studio that had fired Kurosawa a decade earlier, to help finance his next film, Kagemusha.
It is the ultimate revenge story. Kagemusha, the tale of a thief hired as a warlord's double, came out in 1980. It was a massive hit in Japan and won the Palme d'Or at Cannes.
And the success of Kagemusha allowed him to make an even darker, more pessimistic epic in 1985 Ran, loosely based on Shakespeare's King Lear. Tragedy struck in the middle of production when his wife of 40 years, Yoko, passed away. Kurosawa took a brief pause, then returned to finish the film.
In a shocking snub, Japan refused to even submit Ran as its entry for the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar, citing confusion over its French and Japanese financing.
Unbelievable.
The American director Sidney Lumet was so outraged by this disrespect that he launched a successful campaign to get Kurosawa a Best Director nomination anyway.
And the Western support continued. When Japanese studios balked at funding his deeply personal 1990 project based on his own nighttime visions, Steven Spielberg stepped in, convincing Warner Brothers to buy the international rights so Kurosawa could secure loans.
Right.
That film became Dreams.
So what does this all mean? Think about the irony here. For years, Japanese critics accused Kurosawa of pandering to Western audiences.
Yeah.
But it was exactly that global influence, the fact that directors like Lucas, Coppola, Lumet, and Spielberg revered his visual language, that ended up saving his career.
It proves that his techniques weren't just catering to the West. They represented a universal cinematic truth. He built a bridge between cultures, and when he was stranded, those filmmakers walked across that bridge to help him back.
Kurosawa kept writing and directing until a severe fall in 1995 broke the base of his spine, confining him to a wheelchair. He passed away from a stroke on September 6, 1998, at the age of 88.
He left behind a legacy that shaped everyone from Stanley Kubrick and Robert Altman to Wes Anderson. He directed 30 feature films over 6 decades, cementing his place as one of the greatest masters in the history of the medium.
Which brings us to a final thought. In 1990, Kurosawa was awarded an Academy Honorary Award for Lifetime Achievement. He stood before the entire world, holding an Oscar.
This is the man who invented the modern action ensemble, survived World War II censorship, endured Hollywood firings, survived a suicide attempt, and was rescued by his own disciples.
And during his acceptance speech, he humbly told the crowd, "I'm a little worried because I don't feel that I understand cinema yet."
After a lifetime of profound mastery, he still viewed himself as a beginner.
Think back to that 13-year-old boy standing in the earthquake ruins. The boy forced to keep his eyes open, to confront the horror, to never look away.
He spent his entire life looking deeply at humanity, at violence, and at heroism. Yet, at 80 years old, he believed he was just a student scratching the surface. If one of the greatest visionaries of the 20th century believed he hadn't fully figured out his craft, what does that mean for the rest of us?
How much deeper can our own lifelong learning go?
Keep your eyes wide open, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.